then in lab we'll do some work on intensity, and we'll also do a little gameplay thing to try to simplify this as much as possible. Some of you may have covered energy systems in a biology class. Typically in biology they make you do the complicated version, right? I have a much simpler version of the energy systems because my goal is much more applied than theirs, right? You don't have to know all the big long chemical words, okay? The goal is to understand how the system works and when it works so that we know whether we're training it or not, all right? So my approach is quite different if you've covered this in biology. So bioenergetics and metabolism are generally considered interchangeable terms, right? And the idea is that they are the chemical process of taking the energy bonds from the foods that we eat and turning it into usable energy within the body. All right? So we luckily have plants that can convert the energy from the sun into carbohydrate. Then we can eat the carbohydrate and turn that carbohydrate into usable energy for contraction and other jobs around the body. All right. So when we have completely wrecked the Brazilian rainforests and everything else, we're going to be stuck. So, fight for the rainforests. All right. So we're going to look at energy sources first of all. All right. What are the energy sources that we eat? And then we'll look at how we break them down. So our first energy source is carbohydrates, and they are a relatively small molecule, so they're very easy to break down and access the energy bonds within the food source, right? So carbs, we have three different forms. We have monosaccharides, so single saccharide. Glucose, fructose, galactose are monos. Disaccharides, maltose and sucrose. Sucrose is like the table sugar kind of stuff. And then polysaccharides are starches, cellulose, which is not digestible, and glycogen. All right? In case you come across them, glycogenesis is the formation of glycogen using glucose molecules. Glycogenolysis, that's how you say that word, is breaking down glycogen into glucose so that we can put it into the bloodstream. So glycogen, forming glycogen from glucose. Glycogen is our storage form of carbohydrate in the human body. So we have very little glucose stored. The only glucose store is the glucose that's in your bloodstream. Most of our carbohydrate within our bodies is stored either in the muscle tissue or in the liver as glycogen. Right? So carbs will have a 6-carbon ring. So a carbohydrate, a simple carbohydrate, has 6 carbons. That's important later on in a couple more lessons. Okay? We'll come back to that idea. If you are biochem type oriented and it helps you to understand how glucose works, to understand the structure of the molecule, that's fine. But this is not going to be on the exam. The key to the picture is the fact that we have a 6-carbon ring. Okay? So glucose is a simple sugar or monosaccharide. In everyday language, we often call it blood sugar. Right? And it can be used immediately as an energy source within the muscle, or it can be stored as glycogen. Okay. Glycogen then is many pieces of glucose stuck together. Right? And it's, as I said, the storage form in humans and animals. And typically stored in the muscle and the liver. That's where we would find the stores. Stores are finite for us. So it's like a pantry, right? I can put tins of baked beans into the pantry, but I can only put as many tins as there's room for. Okay? So carbohydrate in the form of glucose and glycogen are very important for metabolism, for making energy for muscle contraction, and for making energy for any other reason that we need it, to keep our hearts going, to keep digestion going, to move electrical signals down a nerve. Right? We use energy for all kinds of processes. Liver glycogen, what's wrong with these people? Thank you. Liver glycogen is used, so we break the glycogen down from the liver, we turn it into glucose, we dump it into the bloodstream, and then it can move around to a working muscle. So it's kind of the backup system, all right? Muscle glycogen provides an immediate substrate for energy production within the muscle tissue itself. So energy source number 2 is fats, lipids. Right? And you can see here, this is a relatively simple fat. 2 things to notice. 1, it's a much bigger molecule. Right? 2, many more carbons. Okay? So we can metabolize fat and use it for energy. We can get fats in our diet through plant sources and through animal sources, but it takes much longer to break down a fat molecule than it does a carbohydrate molecule because of the size of it. All right? So it's a very important source of energy, but it isn't the source. If the fire alarm suddenly went off and we all had to get up and go out into the car park, we wouldn't be using fats to generate the energy to move our muscles to get out of the building, because they take too long to break down. All right? So they have an even number of these carbon atoms. They're not in a ring, they're in a chain. Okay. And we have several different types. Saturated, which are generally considered the least healthy. Right? Mono, unsaturated, and polyunsaturated. And the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats have been shown to have quite substantial health benefits. They help lower cholesterol, they help lower blood pressure, Okay, so we want to concentrate our dietary intake on those kinds of fats if we can. So when we come back to nutrition, we'll be looking at kind of our healthy fats versus our unhealthy fats in our diet. Okay? So the storage form of carbohydrate is glycogen. The storage form of fats is triglycerides. Okay? Primarily within the fat cells, so subcutaneous and visceral fat cells that we talked about. But you also see triglycerides, fat stored within the muscle tissue. So if I buy a marbled steak, right, then that marbling is fat deposits within the muscle tissue itself. Okay? So the carbs, I said, was a finite store. Right? I can only store as much carbohydrate as I have room for it. Fats, however, are unlimited storage, really. We have abundant fat stores even if we're lean. And so you really can't ever run out of fat energy. Right? You can't deplete fat stores. Even if, when we talked about body composition and we said, 5% and 12% are the minimum we should be looking at for men and women, even someone who's that low still has abundant fat cells. Okay? So running out of fat is not a source of fatigue. Running out of carbohydrate can be a source of fatigue. Right? So if you're a distance athlete, then we hear distance athletes talk about hitting the wall, or my legs turn to jelly, or that's the point where you run out of carbs. Okay? You can't run out of fat. You'd have to be stuck up on Everest for months to run out of fat. Okay? Yes?
So you said that you can only store as much carbs as you have room for. What happens when you
if you eat more carbs than you've got room for storage, then you turn it into fat. Yeah. Right? So the next slide gives you a picture of the difference in caloric energy value for carbs and fats, right? So remember, calories, the word calories is just a measure of energy, okay? So when we're counting calories, our energy balance, our seesaw, is because calories on the one side is energy in, and calories spent on the other side is energy out, okay? So this information, this data, is based on an individual who's about 143 pounds with 12% body fat. So this is probably a male, but not definitely. Could be a very, very lean female, right? But it's probably a male at 12%, okay? So, whether it's a male or female, this is someone who's pretty lean and in good shape, okay? That's important when we get to the fat number. So carbs, we have about 450 calories of carbohydrates stored as glycogen in the liver. And the numbers are average. Obviously, a great big guy with a bigger liver is going to store more than a little tiny girl with a small liver, right? Muscle glycogen, somewhere around 2,000 calories. And then glucose in the bloodstream is only around 50 to 60 calories. So overall, we've got somewhere around 2,500 calories worth of carbohydrate stored at rest. right? If I've eaten properly and I've slept properly and I haven't just done a really heavy training session, okay? When we look at fat, and remember this is someone who's lean, okay? Subcutaneous and visceral fat calories, nearly 73,500 calories, and stored within the muscle about 1,500. So we're looking at 75,000 calories stored as fat in someone who's very lean. Right? So I have hundreds of thousands of calories stored. Right? Okay? All right? So it's just trying to give you an idea of the difference between this relatively small storage of calories that we have as carbs versus this humongous amount of calories we have as fat. Yes?
So when does the fat take over, like from the carbohydrates when you're working out?
When do you kick over on working out? Somewhere around 20 minutes. It's about 20 minutes. Now, having said that, you're all using fat right now as your predominant energy source because the level of work you're doing is so low right now. So when we're asleep, when we're sitting, and we're working at very, very low levels of intensity, we mostly use fat. But your work output is so low that you're not using very much fat. Right? Then as soon as you start moving, we kick into carbs, and then it takes about 20 minutes of continuous movement to get back to using fat stores again. So that's a good question, and that's what we're going, once we've done all the technical stuff, we'll spend a lot of time talking about, you know, what are my goals? How do I achieve my goals? If I work out too hard, I'm going to use carbohydrate, not fat. So many people don't achieve their goal of weight loss because they're down in the gym running like crazy on the treadmill thinking that they have to work really, really hard to lose weight. Doesn't work, right? Because you don't use fat as an energy store if you're working that hard. So that's what we're going to spend the whole semester kind of trying to get our head around. Setting good programs, setting good goals. How does it work, right? If I know how it works, I can manipulate it, right? If all I know is the manipulation and the manipulation doesn't work, I've got nothing to fall back on to make decisions about why the program didn't work. Does that make sense? Right? So that's why we have to kind of do all the techie stuff first. So, carbs, fats. Energy source number 3, protein. In little letters with exclamation marks around, right? We don't really use protein as an energy source. So we have to be a bit careful when we're talking about protein. We can use or gain protein in our diet from plants and from animals. There aren't very many complete plant proteins. Soy is one, right? But some people can't eat soy. It's much easier to get your complete protein from animal sources, but not everybody wants to eat animal sources. So if you've got people on your team who are vegetarian or vegan, they're going to have to be pretty clever about how they balance their diet and what they eat. All right. So again, when we get to nutrition, we'll talk a bit more about that. There's somewhere around 20 amino acids, and amino acids are the building blocks for proteins. But I don't use all 20 amino acids for every protein. Right? we have essential amino acids. So there's 9 essential. They're called essential because my body can't make them. I have to eat them, otherwise they're not available. If they're not available, then the protein that needs that particular amino acid can't be made. Right? The non-essential amino acids are ones that can be synthesized within my body, so I don't necessarily have to make sure that I get them in my diet. The essential ones are the ones that you've got to pay attention to, in particular if you're a vegetarian or a vegan. Right? Because as I said, plant sources generally don't have a complete set of amino acids in them. So, the thing that the current media hype would have you believe about using protein for energy and that high protein diets are good for all this is not true, right? We use barely any protein as an energy source. Most of our protein that we eat is used for building, mending, fixing, all right? If you run a marathon at a reasonable rate, somewhere around 5% of the energy you need in that 2.5, 3, 4 hours will come from protein. 95% of your energy comes from carbs and fats in a marathon, right? Well, most of us don't work for 4 hours at a time. So most of us never use protein as an energy source, right? So you've got to be a little bit cynical about some of the adverts, some of the comments, some of the diets that are out there, all right? Because they'll try to convince you that you're going to use protein as an energy source. Now, if you eat a high protein diet, your body adjusts a little bit to use a little bit more protein. Will it use protein as your energy source? No, that doesn't happen. All right? So it's time to start getting cynical and not believing what you're told. Any questions on those? No? We're doing okay? All right. So the next useful item that we have to understand are molecules called enzymes. Okay. Enzymes are made of protein, so that's one of the uses for our protein. Okay. And enzymes are engaged in making energy for muscle contraction. They don't cause the reactions that create the energy, but they do facilitate. Right? They allow the reactions to work more quickly, more efficiently, and therefore indirectly we get more energy from the reaction more quickly because the enzymes are doing their work. Right? But they don't cause the reaction, they just facilitate that. So it means that we have to use energy to make energy, but we don't have to use as much energy if we've got the correct enzymes available. All right? So they facilitate the reaction, they increase the speed of the reaction, and therefore we see an increased rate of production of energy. They work in a lock and key mechanism, and that's an important idea just because enzymes have a very specific job. Right? I don't have an enzyme that does 3 different jobs. Everything that has to happen has its own individual enzyme, its own key. Right? So the enzyme fits to the reactive site because it's the right shape. So the wrong enzyme can't attach to the reactive site and get in the way. Right? Enzymes can help with reactions that we call catabolic, so they're breaking things down. Right? They're also involved in reactions that are anabolic, where we are building molecules into something. Okay? But it's important, we have to remember, they don't cause the effect, they help the effect. They can act as rate limiters. So if one of them, if the concentration is low, or it's missing because I haven't eaten the right amino acid to build that enzyme, okay, then we could see less energy production than we would otherwise see. So when we're talking about the energy systems, I'll point that out to you. Right? It's common for the kinds of reactions that we use in exercise that one enzyme plays a key role in the entire process, and if that part of the process isn't happening, everything else slows down. Okay. Enzymes are fussy little things, right? They like a particular temperature, they like a particular acidity level. And when the temperature or the acidity level fluctuate, they decide they're not going to work quite as well. Right? So when we exercise, we see big fluctuations in temperature and acidity. And so enzymes then can play a role in fatigue because they slow down under those circumstances, and then energy production slows down, and so I'm running, and I get slower, and I get slower, and then I start walking, and then eventually I have to go, okay, that's it, I'm done, right? Because the enzymes are going, nah, don't like this, you're too hot now, all right? So, if I increase the temperature very slightly within the muscle, that will speed up how the enzymes work. So it will increase energy production. Right? If I decrease pH, so increase acidity ever so slightly, then we see a decrease in activity. Check them, they're much less tolerant to changes in pH than they are to a little change in temperature. Okay. Let's see. Okay. All right, so our energy has a name. Right? Energy molecule for humans is adenosine triphosphate, simplified to ATP. Okay, the nice thing about textbooks is I don't have to remember what the ATP stands for. I can open the book and find out. So if you're like me and big long words are like, I play with little people, so I don't do big long words very well because my vocabulary is geared towards 3-year-olds. So I can remember ATP, and then if I can't remember this bit, I can look it up, right? So it is the energy molecule for humans, and we're able to make it anaerobically, which is without oxygen involved, or aerobically, which is a system where we have to have oxygen in the cells to produce ATP. And it's comprised of adenosine, link those two together as adenosine, and 3 inorganic phosphate molecules. Okay? So we have a very similar term, adenosine diphosphate, ADP, only has 2 inorganic phosphate molecules on it. We can't use ADP as an energy source, even though it has energy bonds within the molecule. We can't access them. We didn't evolve that way, right? So that third phosphate molecule and the bond to the third phosphate molecule is the key for all the energy that we need in the body. So, let's see if I can try to draw something to make this make a bit more sense. All right? We have adenosine, energy bond, inorganic phosphate, energy bond, inorganic phosphate, energy bond, inorganic phosphate. But this last energy bond is special. All right? What we have to do is break this energy bond, release the energy, and allow the inorganic phosphate to float off within the cell. Right? So when we do that, we end up with ADP, adenosine, okay, plus an inorganic phosphate. I had to change color because that black is running out. Plus hydrogen. And we release energy. Okay. So if we want to build ATP rather than break it down, because once it's broken down, we can't access any energy. We have to build it back again in order to access the energy. It's a little inefficient. It's the way it turned out, okay? So now I have to take my ADP, I have to add the inorganic phosphate back on, which means I need energy to add it back on. So for it to go the other way, right, I have to add sorry, I don't know what that is, I hope it wasn't important. I have to add energy now in order to make ATP. Right? This energy is going to come from anaerobic metabolism or aerobic metabolism. Okay. Now, one of the problems that occurs here is this last point here. Hydrogen is acidic. Right? So when I'm breaking down ATP and I'm releasing hydrogen into the cell, I am increasing the acidity level. Right? So depending which textbook you're looking at, an increase in acidity is the same thing as a decrease in pH. Okay. Just depends which terminology they use. So if I'm using ATP, but I'm not building ATP back up again because I'm working too hard, then I'm releasing hydrogen and I'm making an acidic environment. So that causes a big problem. Hydrogen is the biggest acidity. We all talk about, oh, it's lactic acid, or it really isn't. It's really hydrogen that's the bigger problem. If we've got a nice balance, so if I'm working at a steady state, right? So I've been out running for 10, 15 minutes, and you know you get into that kind of rhythm and everything starts to feel relatively easy, right? Unless you hit a hill or something like that, right? When I'm working at that level, then I'm using ATP, but I'm also building ATP at a relatively equivalent level, and so I don't get an increase in acidity. That's why in aerobic work I can keep going and going and going and going and going for hours, but when I do anaerobic work and I'm not making ATP quickly enough, then I see fatigue because of this hydrogen. Right? We're going to keep going over this idea. So if your brain is going right now, don't worry, because it's a consistent theme for the next couple of weeks, okay? Right, so how do we make ATP? Right, that's the key for us. Because when we are competing or even just playing at sports, right, then I need ATP to move my muscles. So I have to have ATP production. If I'm doing this seriously, then I need to know, for my particular sport, how am I making ATP? Right? Because there are different ways to make it. If I train the wrong way, and I train the wrong system, then when I get to do my event, I won't be able to perform very well. Right? So, which energy system is making my ATP depends on the duration and also how hard I'm working. Right? So, if I do an event that is relatively short, hard work, right, for a short period of time, then we are going to be making our ATP anaerobically without oxygen available in the cell. We have two systems that work anaerobically. Okay? The first system is called the ATP-PC system, and it takes us from 0 to around 25 to 30 seconds, depending upon the person, what kind of training they've done, things like that. All right? So, this is system number one. Okay? System number two kicks in around this time, and it's called glycolysis, which might ring some bells because that sounds very similar to something we were talking about at the beginning of class, right? System 2 kicks in here and runs up to around 2.5 to 3 minutes, again depending upon the individual and their training, right? System number 2 equals glycolysis. If I need to keep moving when I get to my 2.5, 3 minute mark, because there's a great big tiger chasing me and it hasn't worn out yet, right? Then I have to switch into system number 3, which is my aerobic system, but that involves the requirement of oxygen. And it's not oxygen in my mouth, it's oxygen in the mitochondria in the muscle cell. So that's a whole process in and of itself before you can use the oxygen to make ATP. Right? Which is why it doesn't kick in until 3 minutes. With me so far? We're doing okay. All right. So, let's start with system number 1. ATP PC system. What do we have to pay attention to an ATP PC? The ATP PC system is the only one that does not use a substrate per se, in that it doesn't use food I've eaten relatively recently. Right? I'm not using carbohydrate, I'm not using fats, I'm not using proteins in system number 1. Right? System number 1 relies on energy bonds that are already available within the cell of the muscle. Okay? So it relies on ATP and another energy molecule called phosphocreatine. Okay. So my ATP, generally within the muscle cell, I have somewhere around 5 to 10 seconds worth of ATP, right? So I've got some ATP just sitting in the muscle cell that I can immediately break down and get at that energy bond for muscle contraction. Okay. The other energy molecule, phosphocreatine, we have somewhere in the region of 15 to 20 seconds. All right, so here's my 30 seconds that we said system 1 was predominant for. It's not that system 1 is the only system creating ATP, it's that within that time frame, it's the dominant system. Okay? So, when I need a lot of energy very quickly, right, then I'm going to use ATP PC system. So, for a sprint, 100 meters, if I'm good, what's the world record now? Like 8.2 or something crazy? Anybody like crazy, right? 8.2 seconds, clearly within this time frame. If I throw a shot put, or a basketball, or a jump, I'm going to use ATP-PC. When you go from sitting in your chair doing nothing to standing up, you have to use ATP-PC to create the energy to stand up. Right? So anytime we change intensity dramatically, or any event that is short and very hard, ATP-PC. Because breaking down even carbohydrate, it's still a molecule. I have to break it down. It takes time. So I can't use carbohydrate within this time frame because I haven't broken down a piece of glucose yet. Right? So ATP and phosphocreatine then are immediate, fast resources for energy production. going to stop working on me, aren't you? ATP. Right, we're going to break it down into ADP plus PI plus hydrogen plus energy. Right, that energy is going to be used for muscle contraction. Okay. My friendly little enzyme helping me out here is helpfully called ATPase. So I can't forget what it does. Right? If you see any word that has A's, ASE on the end of it, that signifies an enzyme. Right? So ATPase facilitates the breakdown of ATP so that I've got energy for muscle contraction. Part 2 of the system, phosphocreatine, breaks down into creatine, inorganic phosphate, and energy. This is where it gets a little silly, because it would be so useful if I could just use that energy for muscle contraction. But I can't. Right? I have to use this energy, feed it in here to rebuild ATP so that I can break it down again to get energy for muscle contraction. It's a little daft, right? Okay, so this energy bond in my phosphocreatine, my second part of the system here, doesn't give me muscle contraction. It gives me energy to rebuild ATP from ADP and inorganic phosphate so that I can break it down again to release energy for muscle contraction. Does that make sense? Right, it's kind of round the houses, but that's how it works. We also have an enzyme here that facilitates breaking down our PC. Is creatine, oh, it doesn't have an E there, creatine kinase. So, if we got to a point where we were running out of phosphocreatine, at that point we have to decrease intensity or stop. Right? And give ourselves time for recovery. Okay. If I'm in the gym lifting and I'm doing an old-fashioned type weight routine where I do a set and then I have a rest and then I do another set and then I have a rest and then I do another set, that rest period is where I'm rebuilding ATP. Okay? Because the set takes maybe 10 to 15 seconds. Right? The rest period, depending on how long the rest period is, anything up from a minute to a minute and a half. If I'm over a minute, then that gives energy system number 1 time to almost completely recover. So when I start cutting down my rest periods, I'm training this system to work faster. Okay? Or I'm training the body to deal with the effects of hydrogen because I didn't get rid of it all before I did the next set. Right? So reducing rest periods is training your reaction, you're dealing with hydrogen, with acidity, and training system number 1. Okay? All right. Pick up from there on Friday.
Please.